Hello everyone. This learning module accompanies History of Education and Learning module in the Middle Ages. There's some disagreement among historians about what kind of time period this covers, but most agree that it covers a time period of about 500 to 1100 AD. During this time, the Roman Catholic Church was the dominant institution. Once the Roman Empire collapsed, the Catholic Church stepped into that power vacuum. So it became the main institution for preserving and transmitting learning in the Middle Ages. At that time, it was the primary educator for the Western world. Much of its curriculum it inherited from the Roman Empire. It also copied the bureaucratic structure of Imperial Rome. The church curriculum was influenced by a variety of ideas: Greek, partly Hebrew, and Roman ideas as well. The church tried to remove what they perceived as pagan influences from the teachings, but a lot of it was still there. The first church schools were developed in the 2nd century. These were called catechumenal schools. I'll spell that one for you. C-A-T-E-C-H-U-M-E-N-A-L schools. These were organized in order to induct new members into the church. They were taught church doctrines, church principles, and the morals of the church. It also taught scriptures and hymns. In many ways, we could compare it to a modern-day Sunday school. So the depth of instruction was very superficial. The next type of schools founded by the church were called catechetical schools. I'll spell that again. Catechetical. These were much more ambitious. They were founded about the same time. Their purpose was to teach theology, particularly to help members of the church defend themselves ideologically from attacks from the outside. At this time, however, we see a decline in learning across Europe as a result of the collapse of the Roman Empire. The church, however, while they did put a lot of emphasis on learning in a way that could be connected to the values of the church, secular learning did not have as much a priority. So there was not a desire to find new knowledge, such as there was in Rome or even Greece. Lack of desire was accompanied by a lack of critical inquiry, even a sense of trying to understand history not being a priority. However, the church did an excellent job of preserving learning and being able to, so that it could transmit that as a later date. They stored away volumes, libraries of great books. Some of those, unfortunately, were lost or destroyed over time, antiquity. But what is left is in many ways one of the foundations for learning in the Western world. Now, monastic schools began to arise around the 500s-600s, and these were schools, just as they sound. They were in monasteries. The initial intent, primary intent, was to prepare boys to commit themselves to a religious life. In many cases, this commitment would have started at age 7. So these decisions were made by the family, as you can imagine, not by the child themselves. They were taught rudiments of reading and writing. However, degrees of literacy among monks varied. Some were certainly more scholastically capable than others. But most monasteries also accepted students who didn't intend to pursue a religious life. And in many places, the monastery was the only place for a young man to obtain education. And keep in mind, one of the themes we look at throughout this course is gender equity in terms of education. It would be a very long time before there was any kind of equity in terms of women. For women still, education was virtually non-existent. For women, it only could have been available in the wealthiest of families who could have afforded private tutors. And even among the wealthiest families, there was not, in many cases, a priority educating women. But at any rate, the monasteries, they did accept poor students who had some kind of scholastic ability. Poor children could work in the school or the monastery, pay for their maintenance. The curriculum was still based on the teachings of the Christian Church, the Catholic Church. For example, students learned to read and write by studying texts based on the lives of saints. Discipline was very strict. Children often had to live up to the same rules as monks, including silence between classes. Typical punishments could consist of beatings with the rod, fasting, or confinement. You can imagine this was probably a very hard, very brutal, and sometimes existence for young children. But the course of study was largely consistent through the monasteries. It would begin with elements of Latin, which was still at the time very much a living language, followed by the liberal arts. Students and monks spoke in Latin. That was the language of instruction. Purpose of the liberal arts really has nothing to do with liberal, conservative, has nothing to do with politics. The real origins of the liberal arts come from the idea of liberating the mind from the body. So, for example, in our academic regalia, we dress ourselves up, we cover our bodies in black. As you probably notice, much of our academic regalia was inherited by the church. The purpose is to cover the body, leaning only the head, covering up signs of class, of wealth, leaving only the head available. Because in this academic community, in our academic community, it's the mind that matters. It's the idea of liberating the mind from the body, and we symbolize that through our academic regalia. The liberal arts originated actually through the Greeks, but it was defined even further by the Romans and particularly the Catholic Church. The liberal arts were divided into two sections: the trivium, Trivium, and quadrivium, Quadrivium. Really easy. You can probably imagine how many components there were in each. Trivium, 3, tri. Quadrivium, 4. Trivium consisted of grammar, rhetoric, and logic. Quadrivium consisted of arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. Scarcity of books was a problem. This is a time before the invention of the printing press. Any books had to be copied by hand. So you can imagine they were very rare, very costly. Even paper was expensive to make. So writing exercises were not very common. But this was the course of study for the time. It was not pursued for itself, but merely as preparation for the study of theology. Education existed for a religious purpose. This is another one of the things that we'll consistently revisit throughout the course of this class. You get a sense of education being used to meet the purposes of some higher organization, whether it's the church or the state or both. But here we really get a sense of how education is being used to fulfill the needs of the church. As we move on, we'll see that shift more toward the state, toward governments. But keep in mind that idea of education meeting the policy needs of a larger organization and connecting that in particular to social reproduction. So training and practice in religion was important. Intellectual training was secondary. So that's just some background, larger context on education during the Middle Ages. As usual, I'll be reading your posts, and if you have any questions, you know where to reach me. All right. Have a good week, everyone. Bye.